Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us this evening as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe, or VE Day. My name is Elizabeth Gelman, and I have the great honor of being the executive director of the Florida Holocaust Museum. VE Day marks the end of World War II hostilities across the continent of Europe and the surrender of Nazi Germany in 1945. Our program tonight is part of our Genocide and Human Rights Awareness Program movement, or GRAM programming, which we offer free of charge throughout the year. For 28 years, the educational philosophy at the Florida Holocaust Museum has centered on teaching about the Holocaust, worldwide genocide, and human rights issues through individual stories. Our goal is to connect one person to one person, emphasizing the similarities rather than focusing on the differences, and to use the lessons of the Holocaust to inspire a new generation of upstanders, those who stand up and speak out against injustice and hatred. I want to give some special thanks to some upstanders, our members and donors who are with us tonight. Your continued support has allowed the Florida Holocaust Museum to continue to be a beacon of hope during this very challenging time. Thank you for your support. And if you're not a member, please consider visiting our website, the FHM.org, to help us provide important programs like this one. Tonight, we are pleased to be partnering with the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous to share a special conversation between Pastor Chris Edmonds and the JFR's Stanlee Stahl, as well as the screening of the short documentary film, Following the Footsteps of My Father. The film runs approximately 15 minutes, and we hope that you will stay for our live Q&A with our panelists right afterwards. Please feel free to submit any questions you have at any time during this evening's program. We also hope you will complete a short survey at the end of the program. These surveys not only help us create better programs, but they're also needed for many of the grants we receive that allow us to present wonderful programs like this to communities throughout Florida and beyond. Now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Today is also National Day of Prayer, so it seems appropriate that we are hosting Pastor Chris Edmonds. Pastor Chris is the son of World War II hero Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds, whose fearless bravery saved the lives of more than 200 Jewish American soldiers in a prisoner of war camp in Germany. Pastor Chris recently received Righteous Among the Nations recognition on behalf of his late father Roddie from Yad Vashem in Israel. In addition to serving as senior pastor of Piney Grove Baptist Church in Maryville, Tennessee, Pastor Chris is the founder of Roddie's Code, which he created to extend the legacy and leadership of his father. His goal is to inspire everyone to live by Roddie's Code by choosing right, opposing wrong, dignifying life, and esteeming everyone. Roddie's incredible story and Chris's improbable journey to discover it has inspired millions of ordinary people to do what's right for others and be the hero. Pastor Chris will be talking with Stanlee J. Stahl, who is the Executive Vice President of the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous. The foundation, which seeks to fulfill the traditional Jewish commitment to Hakarat HaTov, the searching out and recognition of goodness, has two goals. The first is to repay a debt of gratitude on behalf of the Jewish community to those non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. The second goal is to preserve the legacy of the rescuers through its national Holocaust education program. I want to tell you that the next sentence in the bio I received said, Miss Stahl speaks on rescue during the Holocaust, which is a little like saying Ella Fitzgerald was a singer. Stanlee is a magnificent speaker, blending together scholarly research with compelling storytelling. She has been a good friend to our museum and a very good friend to me personally. So thank you, Stanlee, for both participating and for helping us put this program together. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Stanlee Stahl and Pastor Chris Edmonds.
Thank you, Beth. I would like to thank the Florida Holocaust Museum for sponsoring this program as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of VE Day. The Jewish Foundation for the Righteous provides monthly financial support to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. The Jewish Foundation for the Righteous sends more than $1 million each year to hundreds of aged and needy Christian and Muslim righteous Gentiles, as they are known, who now live in 18 countries. More than 75 years ago, they saved Jewish lives. The foundation also has an international Holocaust teacher education program about following the footsteps of my father. The settings is the Ardennes, the heavily wooded area in eastern Belgium that straddles the Belgium-German border. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest land battle ever fought by the American military until this day. The time is December 1944, one of the coldest winters to date. Tonight, you are going to meet Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds, an American GI from Tennessee, a man who perhaps had not met a Jewish person before he went into the Army. You will meet a man of courage, conviction, and honor, a true American hero, a man of strength and faith. The file footage is accurate. It is from the places mentioned in the documentary. However, before we view the documentary, I would like to introduce you to Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds' son, Pastor Chris Edmonds, who is a very, very special man. Pastor Edmonds.
Thank you, Stanley. It's a joy to be with you and all our friends at the Florida Holocaust Museum on this very special occasion. It's exciting to have your friendship, and thank both of your groups and all of your people and supporters for the incredible work that you do in making our world better and brighter. Elie Wiesel of blessed memory said, "For the dead and the living, we must bear witness." Our gathering bears witness to the Holocaust and the 6 million Jewish brothers and sisters who were brutally murdered by the Nazis, of which 1.5 million were precious children who never had a chance to grow up. We must never forget them, and we must live to honor them. May their memory be a blessing. May their lives inspire us to live in unity. In the darkness, the deep darkness of the Shoah, we also see great lights. The lights of our cherished survivors, our brave liberators, and our heroic rescuers, who remind us that life is precious, hatred destroys, and love always prevails. On this 75th anniversary of Victory Day, we honor all soldiers who have ever donned a uniform for the United States of America. And we especially owe a deep debt of gratitude to those from the greatest generation. All are blessings. All are more than heroes. May their noble lives lead us to stand with humanity against hatred of every kind. One of those lights is my father, a humble Christian soldier who made righteous choices in a Nazi POW camp. If Dad were with us, he would lift up your spirit and warm your heart. In his honor, let me ask, are you glad you're alive? I hope so. Take a deep breath. Isn't that good? Yes, it is. This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. As my father often reminded me, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Every breath is a gift from God. Life is precious. So like Dad, enjoy life. Are you glad you're loved? I know I am. Tomorrow, I hope you will love on someone else by telling them, you're the best looking thing I've seen all day. You know what you'll get? Their laughter and their smile. That's what our hateful world needs. Love expressed by little o you and little o me. Love is the cure for hatred of every kind, anti-Semitism, racism, and every hatred we can imagine. Love is powerful. Like Dad, express love. Last question, are you glad there's a Lord above? I sure am. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. My father was an ordinary man who lived for God and loved others well. He made a difference in others. You can too. And I'm convinced your ordinary life lived well is extraordinary, even heroic. All of us listening are ordinary people. All are hero material. So I pray my dad's story will inspire you to live heroic by enjoying life, expressing love, and embracing the good Lord above. So repeat after me. I can make a difference. My story begins with an old diary, a weathered, fragile book. The diary belonged to a young man from Tennessee fighting for his country on a continent near the edge of collapse. Its owner, my father, passed away years earlier. Since then, the diary remained tucked away with other mementos from his time in World War II. Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds of the 106th Infantry, the 422nd Golden Lions, was captured in the Battle of the Bulge and spent 100 harsh days in 2 German POW camps near the end of the war. This was the story our family knew. To us, it was the totality of his service he never talked about. While reading Dad's diary years after his passing, his words touched my heart. In it, Dad wrote this: "A lot of things I'm not going to write because they're not exactly nice to talk about. I know God was with us and he answered our prayers." Now listen to this. "I learned men even better than before. Some were good, some were bad, some were better, some were worse." But Dad's diary inspired me to look into his service and uncover the true story of his time as a prisoner of war. One evening, just past midnight, I searched Dad's name and rank on my computer. Remarkably, his name appeared in a New York Times article entitled "Richard Nixon's Search for a New York Home." The article recounts how an attorney named Lester Tanner sold his historic townhouse to the president in the 1980s. In the article, Mr. Tanner mentions the bravery of his Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds, naming my father, and said it allowed him to meet the president. Now, that's my father. I'm stunned. I mean, why is Dad's name in the New York Times in an article about President Nixon? Who is Lester Tanner? And what does he mean by bravery? Is Mr. Tanner still alive? All these questions bombard my mind. If so, where is he? So I began a search to find Lester, and ultimately I find him in New York. The day I met Lester, I learned the true story of my father's service. Dad was the highest ranking American soldier in Stalag 9A, a POW camp for non-commissioned officers near Ziegenhain, Germany. It was near the end of the war, late January 1945. The Nazis had strict anti-Jew policies in the POW camps, segregating Jewish POWs from non-Jews, sending them to their certain death in murderous concentration camps. As a matter of fact, the Army told American Jewish soldiers if they were ever captured to destroy their dog tags and never mention their Jewish identity. Late on the evening of January 26th, the Germans sent orders to my father that only the Jewish Americans were to report for the next morning's roll call. They wanted just the Jews. All who disobeyed would be shot. Without hesitation, Dad turned to his men and said, "We're not doing that. Tomorrow we all fall out." It was bitterly cold that morning, January 27, 1945. As the Nazi commander approached, he could not believe his eyes. All the Americans, nearly 1,300 soldiers, were lined up in sharp formation. The German, a Major Ziegman from high command, was the eyes and ears of Hitler in the POW camps. He had issued the orders. Enraged, he rushed toward my father and he screamed, "They cannot all be Jews!" To which my father declared, "We are all Jews here." The Major was stunned. And my father continued, "Major, under the Articles of the Geneva Convention, all that's required is name, rank, and serial number." "Don't quote regulations to me," screamed the Major. "Were my orders not clear? I want only the Jews, just the Jews." Standing on Dad's left was Sergeant Lester Tannenbaum, a 19-year-old Jewish kid from the Bronx whom Dad had trained since basic, one of Dad's best soldiers. On Dad's right was Sergeant Paul Stern, a combat medic from the 28th Division, another Jewish kid from the boroughs of New York. Paul was #1 in Dad's book. Ensuring eye contact, my father leaned toward the Major and said confidently, "Major, We'll give you name, rank, and serial number. That's all. The Nazi turned blood red. Enraged, he lunged forward and pressed his pistol hard into my father's forehead. Sergeant, one last chance. You will order the Jews to step forward, or I will shoot you right now. Well, by this point, Dad and his men had seen untold horrors. Brutal battle, the bloodiest and largest battle in World War II, a death march of many days, bombing while imprisoned in boxcars, 40 days of starvation, where the men were losing, on average, a pound a day. Dad and his men were miserable, haunted by lice, dysentery, and trench foot, forever hungry, forever cold. And just 2 days before this moment, with the Nazi holding the gun to my father's head, Dad and his men were forced to watch the savage execution of a young Russian soldier and were threatened the same would happen to them if they disobeyed Nazi orders. Dad had been shot, interrogated, beaten, kicked, smashed with rifle butts, bitten by dogs, stripped of his dignity, and the only word he would ever share with me about his experience in the POW camps: son, we were humiliated. Maybe that's why Dad wrote in his diary, no one can realize the horrors an infantry soldier goes through. You get scared, and I mean scared. Yet there, Dad and his men, his brave boys as he called them, stood. They stood together. They stood strong. They stood fearless and resolute. I wonder if Dad was recalling a favorite scripture of his. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Finally, Dad spoke. Using his commanding voice, he spoke calmly, courageously. Major, you can shoot me, but you'll have to kill all of us because we know who you are. And you'll be a war criminal when we win this war, and you will pay. Lester said immediately the Nazi turned white. His arm began to tremble, still pressing his gun to my father's forehead, finger still on the trigger. Lester also said it seemed like an eternity. The major, the gun, finger on the trigger, to your father's forehead, and your father said he never wavered, even though time froze like the earth beneath us. Your father stood strong. Recently, I stood where Dad looked evil in the eye and dared a Nazi to shoot. Thanks to the generosity and love of my dear friend Stanlee Stahl and our wonderful friends at the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, I traveled to Europe with Stanlee and a film crew to follow the footsteps of my father. Via the magic of cinema, I want us to hear more of the story, not from me, but from some of the brave men who were with my father.
My father passed away in August of 1985. I was 26 years old. You know, my father, he never really talked about his experiences in World War II or his time as a prisoner of war. He would say, son, there's some things I'd rather not talk about. While my father was a prisoner of war, he kept a diary. Late one night after reading his diary, I Googled his name and rank, and the first link that came up was an article in the New York Times.
I was being interviewed by the New York Times in 2008. All of a sudden, I remembered that there was a Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds who saved my life when he defied the Germans and POW camp. That's all I said.
In the middle of that article, Lester mentions the bravery and courage of his Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds. And I said, I got to find out what really happened to my dad during his POW experience.
I was born in the Bronx on August 8, 1923.
January 27, 1924.
I was born in Cleveland on April 24, 1924.
June 17, 1925, in Brooklyn, New York. I got the draft notice shortly after I turned 18, and I reported in for the draft exam, and they found me totally acceptable. I was breathing.
I was 18 years old, I was assigned as a combat medic to care for the wounded soldiers on the battlefield.
I was in headquarters company of the 422nd Infantry Regiment of the 106th Division. And that's where I met Les Tanner.
And I was Sergeant Lester Tannenbaum of the headquarters company. And Roddie Edmonds was the Master Sergeant. Roddie grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. He probably never met a Jew in Tennessee when he went into the Army.
My dog tag had the information on it, my name and my serial number, and the letter H for Hebrew, so that if they found our bodies, they would know how to bury us.
One of the things we were told that if we were captured, we should destroy our dog tags.
Because being a Jew in that circumstance, we didn't know what our future was.
And off we went to the front. We went over as replacements for filling up the slots that had been opened by casualties. It was December, it was snowy, it was the coldest winter in 50 years.
We replaced the 2nd Division on the front, right in the Siegfried line, on the German side of the border.
We were very vulnerable.
The men had come and were told that this was a quiet sector. And when they got here, just 6 days after they got here, the war came to them.
The first day of the attack was December 16th.
I awakened and heard shell fire.
St. Vith was being attacked. That's our division headquarters 10 miles in back of us.
We were there when the Germans broke through with the Battle of the Bulge, and they broke through in force.
They broke through north of us and south of us.
We were completely surrounded, and we knew we were cut off.
Our position was untenable, and we finally decided to make a break for it. And we are cut off and surrounded by columns of German tanks, guns, troops.
Captain Forster said, "It's hopeless."
I'm reading from my father's diary that he kept. It was a hopeless cause in our case. When Captain Foster surrendered us, he did a very wise thing. Our rifles were no good against tanks and 88 fire.
And out we came to become part of what was the largest collection of captured GIs in World War II, from the 106th, from the 28th, and others. We began to start our march to we didn't know where.
There was a concern that the Germans would just shoot us up. When you're in brutal hands, like the Germans were, you're scared as hell.
I particularly was concerned because my name was obviously Jewish.
And then we got to the railhead, Gerolstein.
They loaded us on boxcars.
We were packed like sardines in that boxcar. No food or water on the 4-day trip to Bad Orb.
So the boxcars we were in turned out to be exactly the same cars that were taking the Jews to concentration camps.
And we went further into Germany.
Boarded train, Thursday, 21 December 44. Arrived Stalag 9B, Bad Orb, Monday, 25 December 44. Registered Tuesday, 26 December 44.
We had to register. Name, rank, serial number.
But then they started asking questions about your religion.
The Germans segregated the Jewish POWs.
And we were assigned to the Jewish barracks.
A special barracks surrounded by barbed wire within the prison. We were in a prison within the prison. The order came down one day that the non-commissioned officers were getting on trucks and were being taken to another camp.
They took all the sergeants and corporals, all the non-commissioned officers, whether they were Jewish or not.
And luckily I am taken out of that isolated place at Bad Orb, and the next thing I know, I'm on a train going to Ziegenhain.
The Jewish POWs who had been left behind were shipped to a slave labor camp.
All of them later were sent to Berger, and many of them died there.
Arrived Stalag 9A, Friday, 26 January 45. I'm walking along Main Street of Stalag 9A, Ziegenhain. People are living here, even today. It's really hard to imagine that these barracks still stand almost intact the way that they were when Dad and his men were here.
British were there, French were there, Russians were there, and now we were coming in to occupy a quadrant of that whole thing.
There were about 1,200 American prisoners. Of the 1,200, I would estimate maybe 200 were Jewish.
In Zingenheim, in my barracks, Lester was in it, Paul was in it, Roddie was in it.
So there's about 240 men in the barracks. You were given one thin blanket. That was all you had.
You went to bed hungry, you got up hungry, you were hungry forever.
Dinner was a piece of bread. We had 10 men sharing one loaf of ersatz bread. So it was probably half flour and half sawdust.
I lost 60 pounds in 3 months. It was January 27, 1945, when the Germans announced that all Jewish American prisoners would fall out the following morning. Just them. Anyone who didn't fall out would be shot. Same thing that they had said at Bad Harbor. Roddie, for the first time in his experience, was in complete command. There was no one there to give him orders. It was his decision. He said, we're not going to do that. Everyone is going to fall out, just as we do every morning. And that following morning, Roddie is standing at the head of formation, and I was standing by his side.
I was there, the German was there, and Lester was there. So I heard every word that the commandant said.
Major Siegmann comes up to Roddie, and he says, you can't all be Jews. And Roddie said, we are all Jews.
That famous line, we're all Jews here, that will live in Jewish history.
Takes out his Luger and puts it next to Roddie's forehead, and he says, you will order the Jews to step forward, or I will shoot you right now. And Roddie said to him, Major, you can shoot me, you can shoot all of us, but we know who you are. And this war is almost over, and you'll be a war criminal. And with that, the Major lowered his Luger, about-faced, went back to his headquarters.
We were able to track the war pretty closely, even as we were POWs. So we knew we were within days of being liberated, hopefully.
The German commanders informed Roddie that they were going to evacuate the camp.
They don't want to be around when the Americans come.
And under Roddie's leadership, we refused. And that's why I'm here to tell you about the story today.
Roddie said, we're just too weak to go on a long march.
We were in such lousy shape. The chances of coming out of that alive are not good.
Nobody marches out of camp. You break ranks and you run back into the barracks. And you keep doing that all day.
The day dawns, and in come the Germans. House, house!
Rouse, getting up, going back and forth.
We can see the British are moving out. Everybody else is moving out. We're still standing there. Finally, they give up, the Germans.
The German officers came up to Roddie and said, okay, camp is yours. And they marched out. We were left alone in the camp.
It gets very quiet. So now a few of us climb up on the roof of our barracks, and then we see 2 lines of tanks.
We were liberated on March 30th by an American armored group.
The 6th Armored Division, as it turns out.
They were amazed to see these American soldiers, thin, hungry. It was such a happy day.
We were liberated on March 30th, which was the 2nd day of Passover.
And every time I ran a Seder, I would make this point because it was the date of my freedom.
I've made new friends and lost some. I don't know whether all my boys are alive or not, but I pray that they are. It all seems sort of a bad dream.
They took us to Camp Lucky Strike, and I lost track of Roddie, and I never saw him again after that day. But it was never out of my mind. I have to tell you, that experience, and Roddie, was a defining experience in my life.
Roddie was incredible. He never really got his recognition, except among us.
We were very lucky to have him with us.
That such people can exist gives you hope, maybe, for humanity.
We stood there, we were the witnesses. We were the witnesses.
So I've been following the footsteps of my father, and it's led me here. The lives of 200 Jewish men were forever changed right here.
It wasn't only my life, our lives multiplied. I have 4 children, I have 6 grandchildren, I have 2 great-grandchildren. So I would have 18 people that wouldn't be here without him. Multiply that by 200, and you can see how important that decision has been.
That's the biggest joy for me, is to see the real people, the lives that have been touched and changed.
Roddie could no more have turned over any of his men to the Nazis than he could stop breathing. He just couldn't do it. A righteous man.
Incredibly, Yad Vashem, the world's Holocaust authority, honored my father as righteous among the nations. Righteous among the nations is the highest honor given by the nation of Israel to non-Jews who rescued and protected Jews during the Holocaust. The historic ceremony was hosted by Ambassador Dermer at the Israeli embassy and attended by President Obama, with Prime Minister Netanyahu Skyping in live from Jerusalem. Also attending were a host of world dignitaries, including movie maker Steven Spielberg. The unprecedented ceremony took place on January 27, 2016, exactly 71 years to the day of that heroic stand in the POW camp. Dad was honored as only the 5th American and the first U.S. soldier to receive the great honor of righteous, and the first of the righteous recognized for protecting and saving American Jews. It was a remarkable evening. I hope the next remarkable ceremony will be at the White House to present Dad the Congressional Medal of Honor. I think he deserves it. How about you? Dad is also being considered for the Congressional Gold Medal, and we are grateful for that consideration. My family and I are very proud of Dad, proud of the men he served with, proud of the decisions he and they made, and the life that he lived. We're blessed to have learned his remarkable story. I've been blessed to share Dad's story with thousands across the world, including leaders from Congress, the Knesset, and the EU. But my greatest blessing has been meeting some of the men and the families Dad helped save. Skip Friedman of Ohio, Henry Hank Friedman of Georgia, Sonny Fox of California, Lester Tanner of New York, Paul Stern of Virginia. I love these men and their families. Along with Dad, they are my heroes. They served our country well. They're great examples for all of us. And they overcame the same hellish POW camps as Dad. Their victory over the horrors of war didn't defeat them, but rather inspired them to return to America, finish college, marry their sweethearts, raise families, be terrific citizens, and lead ordinary lives of extraordinary influence. My dad's legacy are these men and the other 1,292 men that Dad saved, along with their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and generations to come. Lester and I have calculated that Dad has probably saved more than 13,000 people. They're alive and well today because of Dad's righteous actions. If you ask Dad why he did it, he'd most likely say, what's all the fuss? I opposed the enemy. I protected my men. I honored God. I was just doing my job. President Obama said, I know your dad may have said he was just doing his job, but he went above and beyond the call of duty. I cannot imagine a greater expression of Christianity than to say, I too am a Jew. Why did Dad do it? It was simply the right thing to do. Dad fought anti-Semitism and hatred of the worst kind. He fought with deeply held convictions I call Roddie's code. C, he chose goodness, or if you're a person of faith, godliness. And you know you can't spell good without God. O, he opposed evil and hatred. D, he dignified life. And E, he expressed love to everyone, regardless of who they are and where they came from. Even that Nazi major, Dad loved him with the truth. I love what Dr. Martin Luther King proclaimed. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. Love had the final word for Dad and his men. Love was right then. It is right today, tomorrow, always. Like Dad, we must love others well. Love doesn't just tolerate others. Love elevates others to a place where God resides. It's a place of honor. It's the choice all of us can make every day. Simply wake up tomorrow and say, others first, me last. That's what I challenge our children and teenagers to do. I challenge us as well. Your ordinary life matters. And it matters most when you esteem others better than yourself. When we do what's right for others, we extend a legacy of goodness to future generations. Anti-Semitism has not gone away. In fact, it is growing today. It is evil. It is wrong. Anti-Semitism and hatred did not find a place in my father's heart, and it must not find a place in ours. The answer to hatred is in your heart and my heart. You and I are the difference. The Talmud teaches the same. He who saves one life saves the entire world. Heroes, like my father, be the hero. Show up, stand up, speak up, and stay up by staying true to our eternal convictions to love and help one another. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers. Will you commit to save your world? All it takes is one kind word, one good deed, one loving action, one precious life at a time. So repeat after me. I will make a difference. All together now, we will make a difference. How? Because your ordinary life lived well is extraordinary, even heroic. So like Dad, enjoy life, express love, embrace the good Lord above, be the hero.
Well, that was just amazing and incredibly inspirational. I have to catch my breath there for a minute. It was really, truly wonderful. I have a question to ask, and I'm hoping that the other people who are watching this will start sending in their questions if they have not already. I wanted to ask you a question, Pastor Chris, while I know my video is not on. Oh, there I am. There I am. So thank you for the person who let me know that. Pastor Chris, I know your father didn't talk about his experience specifically with you, but did you see other signs of that same spirit in your father while you were growing up? Were you able to recognize that looking back at that?
Absolutely. My father was already my hero before I discovered any of this. He wasn't perfect, but he was a great dad, a great husband, a good provider, and he encouraged us, in the things of God. He had an incredible faith. You know, you really could stack up his life with he loved God, so he had faith. He loved family. He was a family man. Freedom was incredibly important to him. And I think that's why he went to fight. He signed up in the Army in March of '41, several months before Pearl Harbor, and so he went to fight for freedom. And he loved fun. He was a fun guy to be around. You know, but all those qualities of standing up for what's right, he would often go and he felt like he was called by God to sing gospel songs while he was in that POW camp.
Wow.
And so he went everywhere across East Tennessee and sang, not for money, but just for the goodness of helping others. And he would sing in nursing homes. He would sing at the homeless shelter downtown. He was even singing on the street corner with my uncle Bud, who was a pastor, and shared the good news. But he was also a kind, giving person. But he had a very clear sense of right and wrong. He was very black and white with that. You know, number one, he felt like there is a God, that God is real, and that God is good. And because of that, we had a responsibility to God to be good as well, and to do what's right for others. And that's the way he lived. And so he lived that before us every day. And he was also a light in the room. If he walked into the room, he would light it up, and people would gravitate to him. He's always had a quick wit, and was just a fun person to be around. When he left, they wish he were back. That's the kind of person he was. So, you know, I remember him helping people along the way, never asking for credit. He'd say, "Chris, don't tell your mom, or don't say nothing about this." And and I'm sure he did that all throughout his life. I think he was a great example of the greatest generation, because he didn't have a lot of stuff growing up, but he had the right stuff. And I think that describes our greatest generation well.
I agree. I think, you know, your father is the prime example of when we think of the greatest generation. Those are all the attributes that we all think of and hopefully want to emulate. The question, it's a two-part question for Stanlee. One is how you found out about the Roddie Edmonds story, and what was it about the story that really captured the imagination of the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, so that you would want to go and to create this remarkable film?
I read an article about Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds, and I had not heard of this specific rescue story because he was actually, you know, recognized recently. And why I thought it was important for the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous to try to find Pastor Chris Edmonds and to talk about this story, because it was different from the types of rescue that the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous has been involved with for the past 28 years. Most of our rescue stories talk about a non-Jewish person, primarily Christians, some Muslims, who risk their lives to save Jewish families, one person, two people, whatever. But there was no stories about an American GI, an American soldier. There are other Americans who are recognized. Mm-hmm. But this was about an American soldier who did the right thing. Because as you heard in the documentary and from Pastor Edmonds, when they were at Ziegenhain, the American GIs that were over Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds permitted the enlisted Jewish American P.O.W.s to go out for formation and to be deported to Berga, where many were murdered. Where they were killed. They died there, and this was in violation of the Geneva Convention, which the United States government had signed. So I think it's important for each of us adults, but for our children and our grandchildren to know about courage and to stand up to do what was right. And there's also something else. Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds not only saved the 200 Jewish G.I.s among the 1,292 American P.O.W.s, but at the end, when the Germans were evacuating the camp, they were going to go on a death march. So he saved not only the Jewish P.O.W.s twice, but he saved all of the American soldiers from a death march, which many, as you heard in the documentary, I think Sonny Fox said, we would not have made it because they had been systematically starved for the previous 100 days. So it was a story that needed to be told, and we need to learn about American heroes.
I agree with you. And we have a question from, I think, a teacher who's saying, how can we get this film to show our U.S. history students? Great question.
The documentary is on the JFR website. It's www.jfr.org, and you go to documentaries and you will see a link to the documentary. We also have a longer one that is password protected and for educational use. If you just email us, and you can do that from our website, we will give you the password, we will give you the link and a password, and we also have a teacher's guide that a teacher can use with his or her students.
That's terrific. Thank you. So for those of you who are asking questions, please make sure you're asking them on the Q&A bubbles. That way I will see them. I see that there are things going in the chat, but I don't see those, so I won't ask your questions. A question for Pastor Chris, and that is, have you ever thought about finding the family of the German major to start a dialogue?
Yes, absolutely. That is on my list. I will tell you, this journey's been phenomenal, and it's been, to me, it's been orchestrated by God, because he's dropped providential breadcrumbs all the way through. And he's still doing that. Just a few weeks ago, Dad's story was highlighted here locally again, because Dad had been highlighted at the Veterans Parade in New York City this past year, which was a great honor. And one of the Korean soldiers who lives here in Knoxville saw that story, and he served with my father in Korea. And so I was able to meet up with him, and we did a story, a local story, and he introduced me to a friend of his at his church who was a childhood friend of my father, who happened to be the sister of Dad's very best friend while he was in school, in high school, middle school, and elementary school. And she had pictures of Dad when he was a young man. And so the story continues. And so my desire is to travel to Germany in the near future and meet with that family. I got to find them first. But my daughter took a trip to Germany back just as she was going into college. My oldest daughter did. She has several lifelong friends in Germany now, and so we're on the hunt. We're searching as we speak, and so maybe we will have more to that story in the future.
Exciting. Now, you talk a little bit, you talk several times about finding your father's diary.
Yes. I actually have those here with me.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and there's two. This one is, I call this Names, Narrative, and Nothing diary. There's a lot of names and addresses in here. And when I first met Lester Tanner, it took me a while to make the connection that he's Lester Tannenbaum. He changed his name from an experience during his time in Europe fighting for our great nation. And so so it's got lots of names and addresses. Lester's name is in here. Paul's name's in here. Sonny's name is not in here. He was in a different side of the barracks or the camp. Yeah. But Skip's in here. And then there's quite a bit of narrative that Dad wrote about his experience a little bit before they went to Europe, his experience when the battle began. And then there's pages that are missing. The narrative ends abruptly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it says on the 17th of December, which was the second day of battle, he said, I had my last hot meal, and the next page is gone.
Wow.
And then there's more narrative related to his experience, some in the camp, and then some philosophical narrative that he talks about war and why war is wrong, and where he says some men were good, some were bad, that phrase. So, and then there's another book that he kept, and this is the restaurant, the Jolly Chef Restaurant Diary. He and 4 others created a restaurant on paper, and Dad drew all the logos. So you could see the logo here, Jolly Chef Restaurant, and the truck they were going to use. They created menus, floor plans, and they had a plan. And this was all the rage in the POW camp when they would do seminars, because they were talking about different topics and subjects and things like that when they weren't on work details. The most popular was about food. And before they were captured, the cooks were the most hated in their units because the food wasn't any good. After capture, the cooks were the most popular people on the planet. And they would spend hours talking about all the food they wanted. I've seen diaries of men who were in the camp who have 50, 60, 70 pages list of food they're going to eat when they get liberated. So Dad helped create this, and I believe they were eating off an imaginary menu in the camp. And then one other document, my mom is notorious for squirreling things away, and she keeps things, which I'm grateful for. But once the story broke and I was really deeply involved in the story, I went and asked my mom, I said, Mom, is there any other thing that Dad wrote that tells me other things about his experience? She said, well, let me check. And then she said, I think there was something. And so she ends up looking and pulls out 3 pages of handwritten notes that Dad wrote a couple of years before he died. And it was to whom it may concern. And he talks about 3 incidents that happened in the camp and in his journey. And one of those that he highlights is that in pretty vivid detail, their experience of saying no to the Germans' death march and what he told the men to do in order to stay in the camp. And eventually he said, the old German colonel came up to me, threw up his hands and says, okay, you win. We're leaving. The camp is yours. It's pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
So, and then there's the story, which is in the book that I've written about Dad, called No Surrender, but it's the story where they were locked in boxcars. They traveled for several days deeper into Germany, locked in boxcars, and on December 24th of 1944, Christmas Eve, they were bombed in the Limburg train yard, left for dead. And they had to listen to every one of those bombs fall from the sky towards their trains. And Dad's car was in the back of the train, but the front of his train was hit, and his chaplain and others were killed. Sonny Fox describes that very vividly in the longer version of the documentary that Stanlee mentioned a few minutes ago. And I just want to say thank you to Stanlee and the JFR. They have created a video that is incredible. 2 videos. They're both award-winning videos. I use them quite a bit when I speak. If I go on location to high schools or middle schools and share with students, I use one of those videos. But they're more than videos. They are an extension of Dad's legacy, and his story is powerful. But all I want for his story is to get into the hearts of every person on the planet and be fleshed out as they live their lives, so that our world truly can be better and brighter.
It's so amazing. we have two more questions I'm going to ask you. I also want to say people who are interested in the book No Surrender, which I am really interested in, I'm going to go. If you go onto our website, the FHM.org, you will find information about how you can purchase the book. So interesting to hear about food, because we hear so many stories about Jewish women who were in concentration camps and in the death camps, and how they talked about food all the time. It's fascinating to hear groups of men together as well talking about food, and certainly understandable. So here's a question. Even before you knew the story of your father's heroism during the war, did you observe that your father had any affinity for non-Christian people, Jews otherwise? And if so, how was that manifested?
Yeah, I know that he and my mom, they had several Jewish friends. My mom, my dad was a salesman, so he worked with all kinds of people, and he was very good about that. And he was actually an honest salesman, so that's a good thing. And then my mom worked for the police department. She started as a kind of a parking control security agent, and then worked for the police department for several years in downtown Knoxville. And I remember going and meeting several of their Jewish friends, but they had also African American friends. I don't remember any Muslim friends. I don't know that we had a big contingent of Muslim folks in Knoxville as I was growing up. But Dad treated everyone the same. They were all equal. It didn't matter what social economic background they were from, what color they were friends. And he just enjoyed people. He enjoyed life. And I think when you come as close to death as he and those other men did, life really is precious. I remember Skip Friedman telling me, he looked at me, he said, "Chris, please tell everyone that life is a gift." He said, "We didn't expect to survive in that POW camp." He said, "The day we were liberated," he said, "I was reborn." And he said, "Since that day, I've never had a bad day." And I knew that his precious wife, Penny, that he had loved and adored for 65 years, had passed away just a few years from that moment. And I said, "Skip, what about the day Penny passed away?" He goes, "Oh, it was a tough day. And it was not an easy day." He said, but I've never had a bad day since I left that. I mean, that's a perspective that I want, that I don't really have. But those men went to the edge of death and really expected not to live. And I think that their enthusiasm for life and their experience of working together, all those men came together for an incredible moment in time to stand up for their Jewish brothers. Any one of those men could have refused to go out there. I'm not going. I'm not going to go do that. I don't want to risk my life, because the orders were very clear. Anyone who disobeys this order will be shot. That's Jewish and non-Jewish. If you disobey this order, you're a dead man.
Right.
And they all went as one, you see. And then when the gun appeared, the threat occurred, they all stood together. Not one of them flinched. Not one of them started pointing out their Jewish brothers. They all stood together. You see, and so they knew a truth that all of us must learn. Life is not about one of us. Life is about all of us. And that's how they survived, is that life in that POW camp, in the worst conditions you can imagine, they stuck together, even when it didn't make sense, even when it didn't feel right. They stuck together, and that was their salvation.
That is a lesson for all of us. So here's the last question I'm going to ask, and it's about, you talked about the medal requests. Yes. For your father. What action can we, because we will make a difference here, what action can we and our viewers this evening take to help your father receive those medals posthumously, the Congressional Gold Medal and the Medal of Honor? Is there anything we can do? Yes, regarding the Congressional Gold Medal, that is an act of Congress, okay?
So you can call and write or harass however you want to do it, your congressmen, your senators. So there's two bills, there's companion bills in the House and in the Senate. There's probably 30 plus senators who have already signed up on the gold medal bill. We need another 30 or 40 more. Once the Senate passes it, which I pray that they will this year, then the House is pretty quick to follow. There's not been as much activity on the House side. So I think if we focus on the Senate, just call and harass and talk and plead, and you can look it up. You can look up the bill online, and it'll show you the Congress people, the senators who have said, yes, I'm on board. And it's a mix. It really is a bipartisan group, which I'm grateful for. With especially in the world of division that we're living in today. So I don't think there's a greater thing they could do other than to take care of us regarding the coronavirus than to honor a great American hero and say, this is the way we should live. This is the way we should act. Medal of Honor is a different thing. If you have anyone out there has deep relationships with some of the highest ranking military officers, particularly in the Army, or on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they can get this story to them and help move that along. It's kind of stalled in the Army side right now. So we're trying to get some, what we'd say, some influencers to help move that along. I will let me say one other thing. The story is currently we're hoping to have a feature film in down the road, so that'll be on the big screen, and so we're praying for that. We're moving in that direction. So,
well, that is just amazing, and I am incredibly grateful to you and especially Stanlee. Thank you for helping us put this together. It's just an extraordinary story that needs to be heard and needs to be told. And I'm incredibly grateful for you being a part of this. Thank you to the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous. I will remind the audience again that there's a survey that they can take when this is over, and we'd like to hear your responses, and we will pass on any personal responses to Pastor Chris and to Stanlee. Again, incredibly moving. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being with us this evening.